gobbling up healthcare companies across the country. Now, private equity is a misnomer. It's a propaganda term perpetrated by the industry. What they really are is Wall Street vulture takeover firms. And they're taking over healthcare businesses because they've discovered that they can squeeze more profits out of them than they're already doing. Now, if you get taken over the healthcare business by one of these Wall Street vulture takeover firms, what's going to happen? Well, the firms are going to try to make more money. How do they do that? They do that by cutting staffing, reducing quality of care, speeding up care providers, financial manipulation, and rip-off billing tricks. That's the game. That's the entirety of why they're getting into the sector, and they're doing it increasingly with super high profit rates. Public Citizen this week issued a study that examined the best information we've got about what these vulture firms are doing, how they're taking over the healthcare industry across the country. And we've documented a surge in takeovers in anesthesiology, in gastroenterology, in reproductive health firms, in end-of-life firms, in home healthcare nursing, in rural hospitals, in nursing homes. I just want to say a word about the takeover of hospice. Where in the last decade, as best we can tell, the amount of private equity ownership has doubled. Now, hospice was a great development intended to recognize the special needs of people at end of life. And the whole idea of hospice is to give people care, to go slow, to address their pain, to attend to families. If you introduce predatory profit-seeking into that sector, you destroy what hospice is. Yes, you can make more money, and the companies are going to make more money for sure with their business model, but you're destroying what hospice is. So I think the report we put out this week represents the most comprehensive look across the sector of what these Wall Street vulture takeover firms are doing in the healthcare sector. But the truth is, we really don't know very much. And we don't know very much because there's not any disclosure of ownership stake in these firms. And that is why we have to move rapidly for adoption of the Healthcare Ownership Transparency Act, which would give us a true window into what's going on across the healthcare industry, how these firms are taking over, and then give us a guiding path forward for how we address this very serious threat to decent care for Americans, all races, all incomes, everywhere across the country. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for being here. Robert, thank you for that really powerful presentation, and most importantly for the research in the report that you released today. I am so proud to be introducing the Healthcare Ownership Transparency Act, or the HOT Act, because I think you heard what the stakes are. The reality is that there was one line from the report actually that really jumped out at me, and it was from a medical professional, and it succinctly lays out the problem that we are working to fight today. And it was this: you cannot serve two masters. You can't serve patients and investors. And I would add, you certainly can't serve patients and extremely greedy investors. And when we look at the introduction of private equity into the healthcare space, the reality is that these firms are prioritizing profit at the expense of care. We already saw during COVID what happened when nursing homes did not put into place the resources that they needed to take care of patients. You heard from Robert about hospice care. You understand that in hospitals and healthcare facilities, the reality is that people are there to get medical help, not for people, private investors and private equity investors to make profit. If the money, the funding that keeps hospitals, nursing homes, and other healthcare facilities is coming from investors, the reality is that medical professionals who serve in those facilities are put into an impossible position. Private equity entrenchment in our healthcare system is only getting worse. In 2021, firms dumped $206 billion, that's billion with a B, into 1,400 healthcare acquisitions. That means private equity-owned hospitals, hospice, nursing homes, eye care clinics, dentistry facilities, you name it. Now, when private equity invests in a healthcare facility, they cut staff, they perform more complicated and costly procedures on patients than are actually necessary, and they strip the care center of assets, and then they let them fail when they no longer are profitable and close them and sell them to developers. So these actions serve private equity's only goal, which is to make profit while causing irreparable harm to patients and to communities. This is in addition, by the way, to the very troubling trend that I've also been focusing on that we're seeing within the Medicare system of private insurers ripping off both patients and the government through programs like Medicare Advantage and ACO REACH. We live in a country where maternal mortality rates are more than double other leading nations. A country where millions of families are just one medical bill away from financial ruin. A country where 41% of adults have debt that is caused by medical or dental bills. In the richest country in the world, we should be moving towards a healthcare system that not only prioritizes the health of patients, but one that doesn't threaten bankruptcy and destruction at every turn. One of the major issues, though, in moving towards that system is that we are seeing how opaque even that system is and those processes are. We have been seeing that reports come out on the dangers of private equity, but reports that take investigative journalists, like many of you that are here today, and researchers years to put together, while patients who are seeking care have absolutely no idea if their hospital is controlled by greedy private equity firms. So, the HOT Act would take this first step of requiring that all healthcare facilities publicly share information on outcomes and disclose what private equity funds are actually involved, and it would direct the GAO, the Government Accountability Office, to track and report how they affect health quality and cost. It would also require the Department of Health and Human Services to provide regulatory recommendations to address these adverse effects. I want to again thank everyone who's here today, Robert Weissman from Public Citizen and Eileen O'Grady of the Private Equity Stakeholder Project, and so many others who have been working on this issue, because as I lay out what this bill does, I know that addressing regulation doesn't often make headlines. I know that a lot of this issue sounds like it's kind of in the weeds and seems complicated, but what these companies are doing in the weeds is incredibly destructive, even deadly, for patients across the country who are trying to heal. So this is just about transparency. If there's nothing to hide, there should be no problem in disclosing this data. Healthcare is a human right. That's why I'm the lead sponsor of Medicare for All, which we'll be reintroducing. And I believe that people's healthcare should not be determined by an investor's bottom line. So I'm proud to stand here today, introduce this legislation that shines a light on the dangers of private equity in our healthcare system and moves us towards greater accountability for both providers and patients. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Eileen O'Grady of the Private Equity Stakeholder Project.
Thanks. I'm Eileen O'Grady. I'm Director of Healthcare Research at the Private Equity Stakeholder Project. As a watchdog organization dedicated to understanding the increasing influence of private equity in our economy and its impact on people, we're proud to endorse the Healthcare Ownership Transparency Act. Our mission is to empower communities, working families, and others impacted by private equity in the broader financial industry. And because the private equity industry is so huge, those impacts are widely felt, even if we don't always recognize that private equity is behind them. In fact, we've seen private equity investing in virtually every aspect of the healthcare industry, from mental health and addiction treatment to motorized wheelchair carts. We've seen that PE ownership of nursing homes can increase the mortality rate of Medicare patients by 10%. We've seen that PE firms are some of the biggest culprits behind surprise medical billing. And we've seen that firms have found ways to circumvent laws prohibiting the corporate practice of medicine by creating management companies for oncology, and others. At Private Equity Stakeholder Project, we found that almost 1 in 10 private hospitals in the U.S. are owned by a private equity firm. Over a third of those are hospitals that serve rural communities. Many are safety net hospitals, serving poor and uninsured patients. And this is really disturbing because we've seen time and time again that the private equity business model, which is intensely focused on maximizing quick returns at all costs, is often at odds with providing quality care. We've seen that private equity's healthcare profiteering has resulted in dangerous conditions, declining quality, Medicare and Medicaid fraud, increased costs and closures of vital services, and that these consequences have been borne by healthcare workers and the people they serve. I'm worried that what we know about PE's profiteering in healthcare is just the tip of the iceberg, and it's been nearly impossible to hold private equity firms accountable, even when it's clear that their financial tactics harm patients and workers. And that's because private equity firms largely operate in the shadows. These firms rely on the fact that there's very little oversight over what they do and how they make their money. One clue we have about this is that we've seen the largest concentration of private equity-owned hospitals in states where there's little to no regulation of for-profit hospital ownership. In the worst cases, these companies have free rein to use healthcare providers as their personal piggy banks. I want to be clear that we know that the intense focus on profit isn't unique to private equity. We see this in all kinds of companies, including, unfortunately, some nonprofits. But private equity amplifies and exacerbates these kinds of extractive tendencies, and it gets away with it because of the complex corporate structures that shield firms from transparency and accountability. So it's critical for policymakers to pass legislation and for regulators to propose rules that increase transparency and accountability for private equity investments in healthcare. Representative Jayapal's Healthcare Ownership and Transparency Act is a critical step in creating the tools necessary to shed light on the impacts of private equity healthcare profiteering and giving stakeholders the means to hold Wall Street accountable. Thanks.
Great. Well, I think if there's any questions on this, we're happy